Somewhere in the world right now there is a room that most governments do not want you to find. A room guarded not by soldiers or steel doors, but by something far more powerful, by 16 centuries of deliberate, calculated silence. In this room, stacked floor to ceiling on hand-carved shelves of Ethiopian cedar, sit the answers to questions that have haunted the human race since the beginning of recorded memory. Questions like, where did we truly come from? And who were the beings that walked among us before the flood? And where right now at this very moment is the most powerful object that has ever existed on this earth? You were never supposed to know. This is not internet speculation. This is a tradition preserved, copied, and guarded for centuries. What you are about to witness is the documented, hand-copied, generation by generation preserved testimony of a civilization that refused to forget. The version of history that was buried, the chapters that were cut, the books that were burned, the truth that was locked away under the label of a single chilling word, Apocrypha, a Greek word that means the hidden things. But in the mountains of Ethiopia, hidden never meant false. The archive doesn't just tell us where we came from, it describes what the monks call the garments of glory, a sacred state of being the rest of the world has forgotten. It meant too dangerous for the unprepared. Before we begin this journey into the 81st book, you must ask yourself one question. If your entire understanding of human origin, your entire sense of where you came from, what you are, and what you are capable of, was based on a book that had 30% of its pages removed before it reached your hands, would you even know you were reading a fragment? Tonight, nothing stays hidden. Somewhere in the high mountains of Ethiopia, where the air thins to a whisper and the jagged volcanic cliffs seem to swallow all sound, there are places that do not exist on the maps of the modern world. These are the Ambas, flat-topped stone fortresses rising like giants from the desert floor. Atop these peaks sit monasteries carved not onto the stone but into it. To reach them you cannot walk. You must climb. You must pull yourself up ancient weathered ropes, suspended over 1,000-foot drops where one slip means returning to the earth in a way no one ever desires. But why? Why would a civilization for over 1,600 years choose to live in the clouds? The world will tell you it was for protection from invaders. And while that is true, the Ethiopian archive preserves a deeper, more unsettling story. They were not just protecting their lives, they were protecting a memory. Not gold, not territory, not power, a memory. That is what they climbed the cliff for. Inside these stone walls, illuminated only by the flicker of goat-fat lamps, there exists a collection of writings the Western world was never meant to read. Books containing stories that were systematically hunted and burned across Europe and the Middle East. The archive claims these stories describe beings who did not merely visit this earth, but occupied it. Stories of the first humans, not as primitive, ashamed creatures, but as beings of extraordinary sacred power, operating in a spiritual condition almost incomprehensible to the modern human mind. For over a millennium, these writings were set aside by church authorities across the Western tradition as Apocrypha. Hidden, disputed, dangerous. But in the mountains of Ethiopia, hidden never meant false. It meant too dangerous for the unprepared. History as you were taught it in school is not a complete record of human events. It is a curated gallery, a selection of what survived the fires of the Roman Empire, the censorship of the Dark Ages, and the bias of the Enlightenment. It is at its core a filter, and every filter is operated by a hand with an agenda. For 16 centuries, that agenda had one specific requirement. You were not supposed to know what was in the 81st book. Ask yourself this question. Ask it slowly. In the entire history of the known universe, with all its staggering complexity, its geological epochs, its 1,000 civilizations, and 10,000 wars, do you truly believe that 66 books covers it all? Do you believe that the complete mystery of human origin, the full architecture of the spiritual world, the total record of what came before us and what will come after us, fits neatly into a single volume that was edited by committee in the 4th century AD? Or were some pages removed? The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, one of the oldest continuously operating Christian institutions on the face of this earth, has guarded a collection of 81 books, since before the Roman Empire decided what you were allowed to read. These are not additions. They are not supplements. They are not bonus materials. To the Ethiopian tradition, these are the original foundations, and the men who kept them, the monks of the Ambas, the scribes of the stone chambers, did not keep them casually. They kept them the way a soldier holds a position when the army around him has retreated, with the full understanding that if they failed, something irreplaceable would be lost forever. There are accounts of monks who, upon making a single error in a sacred manuscript after 10 years of continuous work, would bury the entire manuscript and start again. From page 1. This was not obsession. It was a high-stakes covenant with the truth. They believed that the words they were copying, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Kebra Nagast, contained what they called the primal blueprint of humanity. They believed that if these specific words were lost, humanity would forget its own sacred nature. We would become biological animals instead of something far greater. The monks of Ethiopia chose the cliff face over that forgetting. They chose the rope ladder over surrender. Generation by generation, century by century, they kept the fire burning. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe to Untold Histories TV and turn on notifications, because some names only survive if someone is willing to remember them. In 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea met under the direction of Emperor Constantine of Rome. The official story is that this council was about theological unity, and it was. But the process of deciding which ancient texts were sacred and which were set aside did not end at Nicaea. It unfolded across centuries. Church authorities in different regions in different eras increasingly favored certain texts while setting others aside. Over time, the books that survived became the canon. The books that didn't became something else. They became the Apocrypha. A pale-skinned Roman administrator sat at a table in the Lateran Palace and pressed a bronze stamp into the leather covers of manuscript after manuscript after manuscript. Apocrypha, Apocrypha, Apocrypha. Not with rage, not with triumph, with the mild, flat concentration of a man doing paperwork. That is what it looked like from the inside, how this ancient knowledge was systematically pushed to the edges of history. A man at a desk, feeling nothing, doing his job. But in the mountains of Ethiopia, the monks kept the candles burning. To understand the forbidden archive, you must first understand the men who died to keep it. Let us call one of them Kebra. It is the year 1420. Kebra has not seen the world at the bottom of the mountain in 20 years. His entire existence is confined to a stone cell 3 paces wide. The walls around him are dark basalt, the same volcanic rock of the cliff face he lives inside. The ceiling is so low he cannot fully stand. The floor is stone worn smooth by the feet of the monks who came before him, each one bending to the same task, at the same desk, under the same flickering lamp. His only tools are a reed pen, a bowl of ink made from the soot of sacred fires, and crushed minerals mixed with plant extracts designed to last a millennium without fading, and vellum animal skin prepared over months of patient labor until its surface is as smooth as glass. He is not writing a book. He is, in the Ethiopian tradition, transferring a living transmission. The monks believed that each word carried a sacred pattern, that the exact sequence of letters, the exact pressure of the reed pen on the vellum surface, the exact ritual of preparation before each writing session, all of it contributed to the spiritual imprint of the manuscript being produced. This is why Kebra begins every morning long before dawn, not with the pen, with prayer, with the washing of hands in water drawn from the mountain spring, with the burning of incense made from Ethiopian cedar resin, with the recitation of specific prayers over the ink bowl before the first letter of the day is committed to the page. He is not a scribe. He is a priest performing a daily sacrament. No congregation watches him work. No one is keeping score. He does it anyway. There are accounts of a monk who, upon feeling his hand begin to fail from age, prayed only for one thing. Not for health, not for more years, only for the strength to finish the chapter on the Watchers before his hand gave out completely. He believed that if the ink stops flowing, the memory of humanity begins to dissolve, that the words being copied are not merely historical records, but living transmissions. And if the transmission breaks, something is lost from the world that no amount of future scholarship can reconstruct. He died 3 days after completing that chapter. His successor found the finished page still open on the desk, the lamp burned to its last drop of oil, the reed pen resting precisely on the edge of the bowl, placed there by a hand that finished its final task, and laid down its tool with the calm of someone who had done exactly what they came to do. Imagine being that successor, standing in that doorway, looking at that finished page, understanding what the man before you sacrificed so that these words would survive one more generation. This is what the archive cost. Not institutions, not governments, not armies. One man, one cell, one reed pen, one lamp that must not go out. When the Portuguese arrived in Ethiopia in the 16th century, they were shocked, not by the poverty they expected to find. They were shocked by the depth of knowledge. These monks who had spent their lives in stone cells accessible only by rope possessed records of ancient history, more detailed and more internally consistent than anything sitting in the Vatican Library. The Europeans tried to correct them. They tried to explain that the extra books, the texts that had disappeared from most Western traditions, were supplementary additions that had been rightly set aside by the councils of Rome. The monks looked at the Europeans, and then they hid the manuscripts deeper into the caves. According to Ethiopian tradition, some monks chose death rather than surrender the sacred manuscripts they guarded. Think about that for a moment. Not for a cause with armies behind it, not for a revolution with momentum, for a book they believed you needed. A modern scholar once asked a high priest at Axum a simple question: why did you risk everything for books the rest of the world calls myths? The priest looked at the ancient, weathered pages in his hands for a long moment before he answered. Then he said, "The world calls them myths because the world has lost the eyes to see the reality they describe. We did not preserve extra books. We preserved the parts you were told to forget." The Ethiopian canon preserved books that disappeared from most Western traditions. While the Western world settled on 66, the Ethiopian tradition guarded 81. For most of the world, those additional texts and the testimonies within them were effectively erased from the conversation. 15 books went missing from the Western tradition, and most people were never told they existed. But there is something else that deserves your attention, something that the archive preserved not only in ancient text, but woven into the biology of the people who kept it. Now here it is important to be honest about what the evidence shows and what it does not. Mainstream historians rightly note that many ancient traditions were written down centuries after the events they describe, making literal verification difficult. Geneticists who study these populations are careful to say that DNA data shows population patterns, not individual ancestral connections. The evidence does not prove the precise narrative of the Kebra Nagast. What it does do is something almost more interesting. It refuses to contradict it. While geneticists were looking at the DNA of priests in Israel, they were unknowingly finding the footprint of the very story preserved in the Ethiopian mountains. In 1997, a geneticist named Karl Skorecki published a landmark study in the journal Nature. He examined the Y chromosomes of Jewish men who identified as Kohanim, the ancient priestly caste claiming patrilineal descent from Aaron, the first high priest of the Israelites. What he found was unexpected. Kohanim from communities that had been separated for over 2,000 years shared an almost identical Y chromosome signature at a frequency the researchers calculated could not be explained by chance alone. They called it the Cohen modal haplotype. The data pointed toward a common patrilineal ancestor who, according to their estimates, lived approximately 3,000 years ago, squarely within the biblical period of Aaron and the founding of the Israelite priesthood. 3,000 years ago, the same period the Kebra Nagast places the arrival of Menelik and the firstborn sons of the Jerusalem priests in Ethiopia. Then in 1999, geneticist Tudor Parfit tested the Y chromosomes of the Lemba people of southern Africa, a community that had maintained for generations an oral tradition of descent from ancient Israelite ancestors. Among their Buba priestly subclan, the Cohen modal haplotype appeared at a frequency of approximately 53%, comparable to Jewish Kohanim in Israel. And Parfit's subsequent research traced the Lemba migration route directly through the Aksumite cultural sphere of Ethiopia before continuing southward. According to this evidence, The priestly lineage appears to have passed through Axum. Then in 2012, a study published in the American Journal of Human Genetics found clear evidence of gene flow from a non-African ancestral population into the Ethiopian highlands, with the researchers dating that flow to approximately 3,000 years ago. The populations most strongly affected were the Tigrinya and Amhara peoples, precisely the populations from which the Ethiopian Orthodox clergy, including those who have guarded the chapel of the tablet in Axum, are predominantly drawn. The archive claims the priests came from Jerusalem 3,000 years ago. The genetic data shows a 3,000-year-old contribution from the Levantine population where those priests originated. These two lines of evidence were developed independently of each other. They point in the same direction. The archive is not asking to be taken as proven fact. It is ancient testimony, but it is testimony that the data does not contradict. And that convergence, in the words of researchers who have examined both, is remarkable. We have now arrived at the account that changes the geography, not the metaphorical geography of theology and tradition, the actual physical geography of where, according to the Ethiopian archive, divine presence chose to reside after departing the corrupted structures of the ancient Middle East. The third great pillar of the Ethiopian archive is the Kebra Nagast, the glory of kings. To the Ethiopian people, to their royal dynasty, to their church and their national identity across 3,000 years of continuous history, this document holds a place comparable to a founding covenant. It is the record of who they are and what they claim to carry. The account begins with a queen. Her name in the Ethiopian tradition is Makeda. You may know her as the Queen of Sheba. In the truncated Western account, she visits King Solomon, is impressed by his wisdom, gives him some gold, and returns home. 12 verses, a footnote. In the Kebra Nagast, she is the axis around which the entire moral destiny of civilization rotates. Makeda, according to this tradition, was not a simple ruler motivated by curiosity. She was a philosopher queen of a vast empire, driven by a hunger for understanding so profound that it could not be contained by the borders of her own kingdom. And King Solomon himself, seen through the eyes of the Ethiopian archive, was not the pale Renaissance figure of Western religious art. He was a man of the East, a man of the Afro-Asiatic world whose reputation drew the most powerful woman in the ancient world across hundreds of miles to sit at his table. Their encounter lasted 6 months. They debated cosmology. They debated the nature of the divine. They debated the architecture of justice and the meaning of sacrifice. Solomon met in Makeda a mind that did not simply receive his teaching. It challenged it, refined it. And in the nights between those days of sacred conversation, a son was conceived. His name was Menelik. Menelik grew up in Ethiopia. When he came of age, he traveled to Jerusalem to meet his father. For a year, he studied in the temple. He learned the sacred geometry of the Holy of Holies, the innermost chamber where the Ark of the Covenant resided. The Ark was not, according to either the Hebrew or Ethiopian tradition, a decorative religious object. It is described as the physical dwelling of the Shekinah, the manifested presence of the Creator in the material world, the bridge between dimensions, the point at which the uncreated light touched the created world with full intensity. And then the year ended, and Menelik prepared to return to Ethiopia. The night before the caravan departed, the Ark of the Covenant moved. The Kebra Nagast says it flew. The text describes the Ark choosing its own destination with the deliberate intention of a conscious presence. One moment it was in the Holy of Holies behind the Great Veil. The next morning it was among Menelik's caravan, surrounded by what the priests described as a golden light unbearable to approach. Solomon discovered its absence and wept, not from anger, from the shattering recognition that his kingdom had been found unworthy. The corruption that had been accumulating in the Israelite leadership for generations had finally reached a threshold the sacred presence could no longer tolerate. The glory of God, according to the Kebra Nagast, left Israel, and it went to Africa. Wait, it gets even more tangible. This isn't just a story from 3,000 years ago. It is something guarded with lives today in a small stone chapel in Axum. If that claim sounds impossible, consider how impossible it must have sounded to the people asked to believe it 3,000 years ago. And then consider that they built a civilization around protecting it anyway. For 3,000 years, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has maintained that the original Ark of the Covenant rests in the chapel of the tablet in the ancient city of Aksum, Ethiopia. Not a copy, not a replica. The original wooden chest overlaid with gold. The one that tradition says housed the stone tablets and the direct presence of the Creator. A single monk chosen for his spiritual purity lives his entire life in proximity to the Ark. He is the only person permitted, according to the tradition, to look upon it. He guards it until his death. On his deathbed, he chooses his successor. No journalist has photographed it. No archaeologist has examined it. No government has demanded access to it. He is the final living link in a chain of custody that stretches, according to the tradition, back to Solomon, back to Menelik, back to the original Afro-Asiatic people who understood that truth does not require the world's approval. It only requires its survival. The suppression of the Kebra Nagast in the Western tradition was, according to those who study this history, a strategic decision rather than an accident. Because if the Ark genuinely departed Jerusalem and has resided in Ethiopia for 3,000 years, then the central geography of Western theological history requires a fundamental reconsideration. The center of that story is not Rome, it is not Jerusalem. According to this tradition, it is a small stone chapel in the highlands of northeastern Africa. And the people who have guarded it through the ages are not a peripheral footnote. According to the Kebra Nagast, they are the continuation, and they acted like it. That single line is the entire context for what happened next. This is the context in which many Ethiopians understand the Battle of Adwa. In 1896, the Ethiopian army, led by Emperor Menelik II, defeated the Italian military force attempting to colonize their land. Ethiopia became the only African nation to defeat a European colonial army in the modern era. Many fought it as a spiritual conflict. They fought believing the Ark was with them, and they won. That victory was not only military, it was the moment a people who had preserved a complete and ancient account of human origin for 16 centuries stood on a battlefield and carried a living tradition into a fight the world said they could not win. Every January in the highlands of Ethiopia, the celebration of Timkat draws hundreds of thousands of people into the streets of cities like Aksum, Gondar, and Lalibela. Each parish church reveals its tablet, a consecrated replica of the Ark, treated with the same protocols of sacred care as the original is said to receive in Aksum. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintains that this practice has never been interrupted since the original Ark arrived with Menelik 3,000 years ago. Through the rise and fall of the Aksumite Empire, through the invasion of Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, who burned virtually every church and monastery in Ethiopia in his attempt to destroy the faith, but did not destroy it, through the Italian occupation, through famine and revolution and civil war. The Ark has never moved. The monks have never abandoned it. The light has never gone out. 3,000 years. Through everything, the light has never gone out. Sit with that for a moment. Consider Lalibela. In the 12th century, King Lalibela commissioned 11 churches in the highlands of northern Ethiopia. These churches were not constructed by assembling materials. They were revealed, carved from the top down, directly into the living volcanic rock of the mountain range. Each church is a single continuous piece of stone. No joints, no mortar, no separate pieces assembled together. The builders removed everything around the church, leaving the building itself as the stone that was always there. The largest of them, Beit Medhane Elem, the house of the Savior of the world, is the largest rock-hewn Christian church on earth. Every inch of it carved from a single piece of mountain. 12th century Ethiopia. No steel tools, no power equipment, no engineering software. Debate continues among archaeologists and historians over the exact methods and logistics involved in creating such an extraordinary complex. The theories proposed are varied, none of them are fully settled, and the precision of the geometry, the perfection of the proportions, and the structural integrity that has kept these buildings standing for 9 centuries without major restoration continues to draw serious scholarly attention. The Western world has the pyramids of Giza and has spent 2 centuries proposing increasingly elaborate secular explanations for how they were built without modern technology. The Ethiopians have Lalibela. And the tradition is very specific about who helped. It has never felt the need to apologize for saying so. The word apocalypse has been so thoroughly associated with catastrophe that most people have forgotten what it actually means. It does not mean the end of the world. Apocalypse is a Greek word. It means the lifting of the veil, the revelation of what was always there, beneath the surface of what we were permitted to see. We are living in an age of apocalypse, not the fire and brimstone version, the real one. An age in which the mechanisms of institutional suppression are for the first time in human history struggling against the distributed, decentralized, impossible to burn nature of digital information. An age in which a genetic study, designed with no intention of confirming ancient testimony, finds data that points toward the same place the ancient testimony has always pointed. An age in which the archive and the laboratory are beginning to ask the same questions. The wall is cracking. The archive is opening. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has a phrase in Ge'ez that the monks write at the bottom of every manuscript they complete. A phrase that has been written at the bottom of the same text, in the same hand, for 1,000 years. It translates roughly as, "This was hidden, now it is found. Write it again, so that it is never hidden again." The 81st book is not just a collection of ink and vellum. It is an ancient map, a map back to the garments of glory, a map back to the original sacred condition we are told we lost, a map back to the version of ourselves that once lived in a garden without shadow, served as priests of the earth, and existed in direct harmony with the light that made everything. The science has begun asking questions the archive has been preserving answers to for 3,000 years. According to those who kept it, the archive survived specifically for a time like this one. That version of you is not mythology. According to those who have kept this archive alive for 3,000 years, it is memory, and they have kept it alive. By candlelight, on goatskin vellum, on cliff faces accessible only by rope, through invasion and fire and sword and silence, specifically so that you could find it again. The archive is open. You are holding the 81st book. Use it. Drop your answer in the comments right now. After everything you witnessed tonight, what feels closest to something you already knew, somewhere deep before anyone had a chance to edit it out of you? And tell me which chapter hit you hardest, because the next video goes even deeper, and it will change everything you think you know about who built the pyramids, who the original Israelites actually were, why the genetic data of an entire highland people still carries an ancient pattern pointing toward priests who left Jerusalem 3,000 years ago, and why the most powerful empire in history chose to suppress a book written by a man the tradition says never died.